African American Read-In. The goal of the Read-In is to make the celebration of African American literacy and literature a traditional part of Black History Month activities because February is Black History Month. And we're delighted to partner again with Lincoln Public Schools for presenting these events. I'm excited because it's about sharing stories, remembering stories, honoring stories, and also together today we are honoring the role of education. Together today, we're demonstrating the power of sharing literature with each other. So I just want to take a moment to reflect on the value of literacy and how fortunate we are that we live in a time and place where all children are educated, boys as well as girls. It'd be easy to take that for granted, so let's not today. Let's celebrate that. And let's take a moment, too, to reflect on when literacy let us have an experience with a book or reading that changed our heart, or changed our mind, or changed our sense of how the world works. I think this would also be a great time to reflect on who it was who taught us how to read. So take a minute to go back, memory lane, think of that person. Also think of the person who led you to love reading and to make reading part of your life. We also want to thank two people who are instrumental in organizing our time today, Pete Ferguson with Lincoln Public Schools and Brenda Ely with Lincoln City Libraries. A warm round of applause for their good work, please. I get to start with the read-in, and I am reading a piece by Janice Harrington from her poetry collection called Even the Hollow My Body Made Is Gone. I want to note that Janice is a Lincoln High School graduate. She now works at the University of Illinois. She also did a lot of hanging out in Bennett Martin Public Library as a young person, so it did her good. This poetry collection has several poems that are based on historical events. This poem is called Traveler. I'll read part of it. And her little note here is October 4th, 1957, Soviets launched the first artificial satellite. This is the first stanza. Every 98 minutes, the past tries its voice. Its telemeter measures the distance. Memory, a satellite, numinous, and small as a basketball. This is the second section. This is when they left Vernon, heading north in a yellow station wagon. Anna in the front seat beside Charles, staring out at the plumb black night, gazing at its immeasurable pricklings, a night as wide as the River Jordan, wide, wide, and far above. And the oldest child, awake, looks up into that vastness and thinks, as a child can, this world is beautiful, this black sky is beautiful, these sleepers are beautiful, and I am safe. A Negro family going north, one of thousands leaving Tupelo, Montgomery, Valdosta, Chattanooga, Lynchburg. Against the black night, the drumming of tires, in a tire's percussion, the sound of loss. A night lingering like the smell of fried chicken, and from a sleeping fist the spill of cornbready stars, yellow, white, and ashy gray. The dashboard lights reflect the black glass. Dark woods, dark fields, and dark towns go by untended. Charles rests his hand steady on the wheel. Anna stares into the darkness. The road repeats, swing low, swing low, swing low. Another car passes by. Other travelers passing by, going somewhere they heard was better. That's from Janice Harrington. And at this time, I'd like to have you help me welcome Pete Ferguson to the podium.
Presidential Medal of Freedom.
That's right.
See what it's like. Okay, thank you, thank you. Good afternoon. We can do better than that. Good afternoon. All right. At 11 a.m. on March 27th, 1961, 9 students from the historically black Tougaloo College walked into an all-white Jackson, Mississippi library. 9 African-American scholars who were members of the Tougaloo NAACP Youth Council participated in Mississippi's first civil rights read-in at the white-only Jackson Municipal Public Library. On March 27th, 1961, those 9 individuals, 4 females and 5 males, entered the segregated main branch of that library in search of source material for a class assignment. When the scholars took seats and began reading, a library staff member called the police. After refusing orders by the police chief to leave the library, those 9 were arrested. The read-in drew support from scholars at Jackson and Tougaloo colleges, as well as the Millsaps, a predominantly white college in Jackson. The Tougaloo 9 were charged and convicted of breach of peace. Each of them was fined $100 and given a 30-day suspended sentence. Ronald McNair was one of the astronauts killed nearly 30 years ago on January 28th when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. McNair was only the second African American to visit space. As his older brother Carl recalls, McNair started dreaming about space in South Carolina where he grew up, and he wanted to study science. But first, he needed to get his hands on some advanced books, and there was a little bit of a problem. When he was 9 years old, Ron, without his parents or himself knowing his whereabouts, decided to take a mile walk from his home down to a library. This is what his friend Carl tells his friend Vernon Skipper. The library was public, Carl says, but not so public for black folks. When you're talking about 1959. So as he was walking in there, all these folks were staring at him because there were only white folks. And they were looking at him and saying, you know, who is that Negro? So he politely positioned himself in line to check out his books. Well, this old librarian, she says, this library is not for coloreds. He said, well, I would like to check out these books. She replied, young man, if you don't leave this library right now, I'm gonna call the police. So he just popped himself onto the counter and he sat there and then he said, you know what? I'll just wait. The librarian called the police. When the police got to the library, 2 burly guys came in and said, well, where's the disturbance? And she pointed to this little 9-year-old boy sitting up on the counter. And the policeman says, ma'am, what's really the problem? By then, the young man's mother was on his way. She comes down there praying the whole way down there. Jesus, please, don't let them put my child in jail. And my mother asked the librarian, ma'am, what's the problem? She replied, he wanted to check out the books, and you know, your son just shouldn't be down here. And the police officer looked at her and said, you know, why don't you just give the kid those books? And the mother said, I promise, ma'am, he'll take good care of them. So the librarian reluctantly handed over the books, and then the mother looked at her son and said, son, what do you say? And Ron answered, thank you, ma'am. As I said, good afternoon. My name is Pete Ferguson, the Youth Development Coordinator for Lincoln Public Schools. Today, we recognize those struggles that many have fought for to ensure intellectual freedom, service, and knowledge that we know should be available to all. Today's read-in represents an ongoing collaboration, as Pat said, between Lincoln Public Schools and Lincoln City Libraries in conjunction with the National Council for Teachers of English, who will host National African read-ins across the country. The National Literacy Initiative kicks off what is defined as Black History Month. The purpose of this read-in today is to share unique experiences found in African American literature with students, scholars, and individuals from pre-K to adults. Today, you're going to have the great privilege to hear readings and view performances by community stakeholders who will explore the rich African American history as well as the role and contributions African Americans play in the world of literature and the arts. I thank you for being in attendance today, and we look forward to you enjoying today's program and hope that something will grab you and continue to fuel your steps as you walk together towards civility, kindness, equity, and justice. Readers, except for our first, will not be introduced. We'll operate Negro League style. Baseball. Yeah, thank you. And with the next presenter being on deck. They will self-introduce and share why they chose their piece and the impact that it's had on them, and their hope is how it will speak to you. Again, thank you for joining us today. And with our first reader, please come forward.
Thank you. Welcome. Here we go. Yeah. Awesome. Good afternoon. My name is Erica Kirkland, and I coach at Lincoln High School. I've coached cheerleading at Lincoln High for 16 years. And a lot of what I do every day involves building relationships, helping students understand how to work together. But a lot of who I am came from my parents, who are both strong, very, very effective leaders. In particular, my mother, who taught me so much about not only being a woman, but being a strong African-American woman, which is something I try to relay to the students that I work with. The passage that I chose to share today comes from Michelle Obama's book, Becoming. And I think that it spoke to me because she spoke a lot about her role as both a wife, a mother, and a professional, and just the pressure we can feel to try and do it all. And as I talk to students about building for their future, planning for those things, I can definitely see the impact of feeling like they need to do it all. So this really spoke to me. For many women, including myself, wife can feel like a loaded word. It carries a history. If you grew up in the 1960s and 70s as I did, wives seemed to be the genius of white women who lived inside television sitcoms. Cheery, coiffed, corseted. They stayed at home, fussed over the children, and had dinner ready on the stove. They sometimes got into the sherry or flirted with the vacuum cleaner salesman, but the excitement seemed to end there. The irony, of course, was that I used to watch those shows in our living room on Euclid Avenue while my own stay-at-home mom fixed dinner without complaint, and my own clean-cut dad recovered from a day at work. My parents' arrangement was as traditional as anything we saw on TV. Barack sometimes jokes, in fact, that my upbringing was like a black version of Leave It to Beaver, with the South Shore Robinsons, as steady and fresh-faced as the Cleaver family of Mayfield, USA. Though, of course, we were a poorer version of the Cleavers, with my dad's Blue City worker's uniform subbing for Mr. Cleaver's suit. Barack makes this comparison with a touch of envy because his own childhood was so different, but also as a way to push back on the entrenched stereotype that African Americans primarily live in broken homes, that our families are somehow incapable of living out the same stable, middle-class dream as our white neighbors. Personally, as a kid, I preferred the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which I absorbed with fascination. Mary had a job, a snappy wardrobe, and really great hair. She was independent and funny, and unlike those of the other ladies on TV, her problems were interesting. She had conversations that weren't about children or homemaking. She didn't let Lou Grant boss her around, and she wasn't fixated on finding a husband. She was youthful and at the same time grown up. In the pre-internet landscape, when the world came packaged almost exclusively through channels of network TV, this stuff mattered. If you were a girl with a brain and a dawning sense that you wanted to grow into something more than a wife, Mary Tyler Moore was your goddess. And here I was now, 29 years old, sitting in the very same apartment where I'd watched all that TV and consumed all those meals dished up by the patient and selfless Marion Robinson. I had so much: an education, a healthy sense of self, a deep arsenal of ambition, and I was wise enough to credit my mother, in particular, with instilling it in me. She taught me how to read before I started kindergarten, helping me sound out words as I sat curled like a kitten in her lap, studying a library copy of Dick and Jane. She'd cook for us with care, putting broccoli and Brussels sprouts on our plates and requiring that we eat them. She had hand-sewn my prom dress, for God's sake. The point was, she'd given diligently, and she'd given everything. She'd let our family define her. I was old enough now to realize all the hours she gave to me and Craig were hours she didn't spend on herself. My considerable blessings in life were now causing a kind of psychic whiplash. I'd been raised to be confident and see no limits, to believe I could go after and get absolutely anything I wanted, and I wanted everything. Because as Suzanne would say, why not? I wanted to live with the hat-tossing, independent career woman zest of Mary Tyler Moore, and at the same time I gravitated toward the stabilizing, self-sacrificing, seemingly bland normalcy of being a wife and a mother. I wanted to have a work life and a home life, but with some promise that one would never fully squelch the other. I hoped to be exactly like my own mother, and at the same time, nothing like her at all. It was an odd and confounding thing to ponder. Could I have everything? Would I have everything? I had no idea.
It's like I'm winning like a Nobel Prize or something.
Sure.
Yes.
There you go.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benny Shobe. I'm a member of your Lincoln City Council, and I'd like to thank Lincoln City Libraries, Lincoln Public Schools for the opportunity to do this. This is something that excites me greatly. Every year I get to see the other participants on YouTube reading their selections going, ooh, I've got to find that book, I got to read that article. And so now I get to hopefully inspire someone to pick up a copy of James Baldwin's The Fire next time. This is something I read last year as I was trying to get caught up on some things that I was supposed to read in high school but didn't get around to. And The Fire Next Time is actually the reprinting and the packaging of two essays Baldwin wrote in the early 1960s. I'm going to read one called, let me get the name right, My Dungeon Shook, which is a letter to his nephew. The other selection is Down by the Cross, a letter from the region of my mind. They both were published as serials in magazines and then republished in the article. I'm going to read excerpts from My Dungeon Shook, which is a letter to his nephew, a 15-year-old James, his namesake. When I was reading it last year, it reminded me a lot of Ta-Nehisi Coates' letters to his son. And I was taken aback by how timely it was, even though it was written 57 years ago. So here you go. Dear James, I began this letter 5 times and tore it up 5 times. I keep seeing your face, which is also the face of your father, my brother. Like him, you are tough, dark, vulnerable, moody, with a very definite tendency to sound truculent because you want no one to think that you are soft. I've known you both all your lives. I carried your dad in my arms and on my shoulders, kissed him, spanked him, watched him learn to walk. I don't know if you've known anybody from that far back, if you've loved anyone that long. First as an infant, then as a child, then as a man. You gain a strange perspective on time and human pain and effort. I know what the world has done to my brother and how narrowly he has survived it. And I know, which is much worse, and this is the crime for which I accuse my country and my countrymen, and for which neither I nor history nor time will forgive them, that they have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives, and they do not know it and do not want to know it. One can be, indeed, one must strive to become tough and philosophical concerning destruction and death, for this is what most of mankind has been best at since we have heard of man. But remember, most of mankind is not all of mankind. But it is not permissible that the authors of devastation should also be innocent. It is the innocence which constitutes the crime. I know the conditions under which you were born, for I was there. Your countrymen were not there, and they haven't made it there yet. For here you were, Big James, my namesake. You were a big baby. I was not. Here you were, to be loved, baby, hard, at once, and forever, to strengthen you against a loveless world. And now you must survive because we love you, and for the sake of your children and your children's children. This innocent country has set you down in a ghetto in which In fact, it intended you should perish. Let me spell it out more precisely. What I mean by that, for the heart of the matter is here, and the root of the dispute with my country. You were born where you were born, and you faced the future that you faced because you were, and for no other reason, black. The limits on your ambitions were thus expected to be set forever. You were born into a society which spelled out with brutal clarity and in so many ways possible that you were a worthless human being. You were not expected to aspire to excellence. You were expected to make peace with mediocrity. Wherever you turned, James, in your short time on this earth, you were told where to go, what you could do, and how you could do it, and where you could live, and whom you could marry. The details and the symbols of your life have been deliberately constructed to make you believe what white people say about you. Please try to remember that what they believe, as well as what they do and cause you to endure, does not testify to your inferiority, but to their inhumanity and their fear. Please try to be clear, dear James. Through the storm which raises about your youthful head today, about the reality which lies behind the words acceptance and integration, there is no reason for you to try to be like white people, and there's no basis whatsoever for their impertinent assumption that they must accept you. The really terrible thing, oh buddy, is that you must accept them. And I mean that very seriously. You must accept them and accept them with love. For these innocent people have no other hope. They are, in effect, still trapped in a history which they did not understand, and until they understand it, they cannot be released from it. They have had to believe for many years and for innumerable reasons that black men are inferior to white men. Many of them do indeed know, as you and I, but as you will discover, many of them indeed know better. But as you will discover, people find it hard to act on what they know. The act is to be committed, and to be committed to is to be in danger. In this case, the danger is in the minds of most white Americans and is the loss of their identity. You, James, don't be afraid. As I said, it was intended for you that you should perish in the ghetto. Perish by never being allowed to go behind the white man's definition, by never being allowed to spell your name properly. You have, and many of us have, defeated this intention. And by terrible law, a terrible paradox, those innocents who believe that your imprisonment made them safe are losing their grasp on reality. But these men are your brothers, your lost younger brothers. And the word integration means, and if the word integration means anything, that is, it means that we, with love, shall force our brothers to see themselves as they are, to cease fleeing from reality, and to begin to change it. For this is your home, my friend. Do not be driven from it. Great men have done great things here, and will again. And we can make America what America must become. It will be hard, James, but you come from sturdy stock, peasant stock, men who picked cotton, men who dammed rivers, men who built the railroad, and in the teeth of the most tenacious odds achieved unassailable and monumental dignity. You come from a long line of great poets, some of the greatest poets since Homer. One of them said, "The very time I thought I was lost, my dungeon shook and my chains fell off." You know, and I know, that this country is celebrating 100 years of freedom, 100 years too soon. We cannot be free until we are all free. God bless you, James, and Godspeed, your Uncle James. This was written on the 100-year anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. I read some excerpts from the letter. I encourage you to find a copy of the book. This one comes from the Bennett Martin Library. and read it in its entirety along with some other essays by James Baldwin. It's encouraging to hear that we've come some way, but we still have a lot of work ahead of us. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Bill Bryan. I'm a student advocate with Lincoln Public Schools. Today I'm going to read you an excerpt from a book called Tough Boy Sonatas. And it was written by Curtis Chrysler. And Curtis Chrysler was born and raised in Gary, Indiana. And he received a BA in English with a minor in theater from Indiana University / Purdue University, which was in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I chose, it's a book of poetry and prose. I chose the poem Lifted because I could identify with this young man who emulated only the images that he saw on television as a child. And this visitation that he had was kind of like an epiphany for him. Leroy snagged on the thread of black and white boob tube, dreamt he'd be a Brady, prayed he'd sing like little Davy of the Monkees, or be a partridge in a white family, all the fixings. His smile got wider and wider until his teeth were too bright. So Ali and Malcolm bum rushed him, snatched him out of bed and said, "Come with us." He asked, "Who are you?" "Come with us, Roy. I need to put on some clothes, can't go outside in PJs. Come with us, young brother, come with us now." The duo were firm baritones. They spoke before grabbing him by the arm, feeling his warmth on flight down Lenox Avenue, each MLK Drive, populated downtowns and Broadways, family reunions, backyard barbecues. Ali, sharp in his black suit, white button-down shirt, and thin black tie. Malcolm was a photocopy of Ali. Leroy didn't worry about his clothes since his eyes were full of brown, black, and tan people with afros, braids, bald heads, big and thin lips, slanted and round eyes, big and small butts, dressed in colors that bellowed their names. When people saw Ali, Ali verbalized his thing with a left jab, then right cross, smiling, laying down the footwork, and they sang out, Muhammad, Muhammad Ali, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Malcolm smiled. He threw a right cross too. Leroy did not give a budge, and in periphery saw the young boys his age. I'm so pretty. Look like Kunta Kinte, like my people, Ali cried out. His hands left his body, performed lightning-fast combinations. The small children smiled, mobbed Ali and Malcolm. I don't look like Kunta, said Leroy, and turned away. Pretty like Kunta and the ghetto children, said Ali. Beautiful like Mandingo boy. Ali spouted as his hands reattached. He took 3 steps back from the children, ducked, jabbed right, threw right cross, jabbed left and right cross, left uppercut, jab, jab, jab. I'm not like Kunta. I'm not a slave, ugly, pitiful, on chains. I live in Delaney Projects. I don't have no master, just mama, like Kunta. Ali said and jabbed, stepped back, double jab, then right, left hook, right uppercut. Like Kunta, smiled Malcolm. Like Moses, Pharaoh, and Jesus. Malcolm put his arms around Leroy, harnessed in the boys' grown-up huffs and puffs. They paraded Paris streets in Montmartre with Hughes, Fawcett, and Cullen, found freedom America couldn't offer, walked with lions and giraffes in temperate Serengeti with diplomats, our United Nations, the fellas we know. When back in USA, Stevie Wonder boomed in Delaney streets with a hard bass, backbeat coming out of Electra 225s with the sweet smell of coconut pimp oil singing. It's time we learned this world was made for all men. Leroy splashed cold water on his face, smiling in the mirror at his brownness, with grocery-sized bags under his eyes. Hot adrenaline clacked hot in his veins. Leroy smiled and heard, pretty like Moses, man, pretty like Jesus, pretty like Mandingo Boy, pretty like you, my baby face, brown brother.
Good afternoon. My name is Trevor Boyd. I'm in the Nebraska Air National Guard. I'm originally from Maryland. I went to school at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. I come a long way, but today I just came from the airport, just right down the road. Before you, you probably see an image of strength. The United States military puts a great deal of consideration and time in how we present ourselves. A polished look. We have to wear our uniform a certain way. We have regulations that guide it. We have people that tell us when we're not up to standard, when we don't look the part. But I tell you, behind the uniform is a man that is not polished, a man that has many weaknesses, many shortcomings. And I tell you that because there is power in our stories. There's power in humility. And we can find strength. And that's what I want to talk to you about. Button Up Buddy is a story of a young boy who goes on a journey. And his journey is filled with many trials, many tribulations. He's a young man who doesn't have a family. He's in a foster home, and he goes on a journey to find his father, whom he believes is a musician, because his mother left him a poster of a man on a poster, a musician that he thinks is his father. But before I get to that, I just want to let you know that this is the first book I ever read. It was probably about age 11 or 12 that I was given this book. It was probably for a school project, and it kind of got me on a lifelong journey of reading and the pursuit of knowledge and understanding and wisdom that ultimately led me to the United States Air Force Academy, which is one of the most prestigious schools in our country. And I don't say that to puff myself up with pride, but I say that as the first man in my family that ever went to college, and that's extended family as well. And when I got there, I was still filled with many trials and tribulations myself. And it was tough to get through it. And we all have these trials that we face in life. We all have a wild journey that builds our story. And Bud's journey is no different. In our journey of discovery, you know, just as in Bud's journey of discovery of his father, we can find strength, we can find power. Bud was driven by a difficult present as a foster child who had nothing. And his parents abused him, his older brother abused him, as we'll read here in a little bit. But you know, he had a difficult present that he was trying to escape. And he also had a difficult past. You know. Each of us has our own history, our own past that's driving us forward. And it's important to recognize that, to understand that, and accept that. But don't let that be the end. the pursuit of knowledge, the pursuit of understanding. There's a great quote at the United States Air Force Academy that's inscripted on a statue that all us cadets get to see every day as we go to class. It's man's flight through life is sustained by the power of his knowledge. I forget who the quote is from, but this lifelong journey that I've been on is a journey of discovery, of knowledge, of wisdom and understanding that started with this book. So I'll read from it. Chapter 1. Here we go again. We were all standing in line waiting for breakfast when one of the caseworkers came in and tap, tap, tap down the line. Uh-oh, this meant bad news. Either they'd found a foster home for somebody or somebody was about to get paddled. All the kids watched the woman as she moved along the line, her high-heeled shoes sounding like little firecrackers going off on the wooden floor. Shoot! She stopped at me and said, "Are you Buddy Caldwell?" I said, "It's Bud, not Buddy, ma'am." She put her hand on my shoulder and took me out of the line. Then she pulled Jerry, one of her littler boys, over. "Aren't you Jerry Clark?" He nodded. "Boys, good news. Now that the school year has ended, you both have been accepted in new temporary care homes starting this afternoon." Jerry asked the same thing I was thinking. "Together?" She said, "Why no, Jerry. You'll be in a family with 3 little girls." Jerry looked like he'd just found out they were going to dip him in a pot of boiling milk. "And Bud?" She looked at some papers she was holding. "Oh, yes, the Amoses. You'll be with Mr. and Mrs. Amos and their son, who's 12 years old. That makes him just 2 years older than you, doesn't it, Bud?" "Yes, ma'am." She said, I'm sure you'll both be very happy." Me and Jerry looked at each other. The woman said, Now, boys, no need to look so glum. I know you don't understand what it means, but there's a depression going on all over this country. People can't find jobs, and these are very, very difficult times for everybody. We've been lucky enough to find 2 wonderful families who've opened their doors for you. I think it's best that we show our new foster families that we're very—" She dragged out the word very, waiting for us to finish her sentence for her. Jerry said, "cheerful, helpful, and grateful." I moved my lips and mumbled. She smiled and said, "Unfortunately, you won't have time for breakfast. I'll have a couple of pieces of fruit put in a bag. In the meantime, go to the sleep room and strip your beds and gather all of your things." Here we go again. I felt like I was walking in my sleep as I followed Jerry back to the room where all the boys' beds were jam-jammed together. This was the 3rd foster home I was going to, and I'm used to packing up and leaving. But it still surprises me that there are always a few seconds right after they tell you you've got to go, when my nose gets all runny, my throat gets all choky, and my eyes get all stinky. But the tears coming out don't happen to me anymore. I don't know when it first happened, but it seems like my eyes don't cry no more. Jerry sat on his bed, and I could tell that he was losing the fight not to cry. Tears were popping out of his eyes and slipping down his cheeks. I sat down next to him and said, "I know being in a house with 3 girls is going to sounds terrible, Jerry, but it's a lot better than being with a boy who's a couple of years older than you. I'm the one who's going to have problems. An older boy is going to want to fight, but those little girls are going to treat you real good. They're going to treat you like some kind of special pet or something." Jerry said, "You really think so?" I said, "I'd trade you in a minute. The worst thing that's going to happen to you is that they're going to make you play house a lot. They'll probably make you be the baby and will hug you and do this kind of junk to you." I tickled Jerry under his chin and said, "Gaga, goo goo, baby, baby." Jerry couldn't help but smile. I said, "You're going to be great." Jerry looked like he wasn't so scared anymore, so I went over to my bed and started getting ready. Now in there, this is, like I said, it's a book about a journey that these kids go on, and it leads to a self-discovery. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you. Oh.
Thank you.
Good.
Appreciate it. Hello, I'm John Harris with Encouragement Unlimited, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm from St. Louis originally, and I grew up in a small black community called Wellston, which is in St. Louis County, 4,000 people. And all I knew was what was in Wellston. St. Louis is a big place, and there's counties and different municipalities, but everything that was important to me was in Wellston. And I figured one day I would leave Wellston, maybe, and venture into the environs beyond. But how would I know who the people were beyond Wellston? It's predominantly black. Everything I valued, everything I cared about was black. No Hispanics there, no Native Americans. We did have Asian folks there. They were part of the fried rice kitchens on the corner. But we didn't have a relationship. We gave them money and they gave us food. We never asked them how their days were. I bring this to you because sometimes I'm challenged with the concept of otherness. Otherness. How do we think beyond ourselves to those who are the other people, who are the strangers most of the time to us? And sometimes I think it didn't hit me until I got an opportunity to go to this private school, because I figured one day I needed to learn about white people because I was going to encounter them one day. And so what did I do? I sat down with my mom about 2:30, 3 o'clock every day, and I watched Days of Our Lives. That's right. Yeah, and so I figured I'd learn from Days of Our Lives what the other side was like. Interestingly enough, I left the hood and went to a private school, and guess what? Those kids were just like the kids on Days of Our Lives. The book I'm going to share with you today is a book about a girl who is in her own world like I was in Wellston. And then she gets an opportunity to venture beyond, as I did when I left Wellston and went to the private school. And in that venture into this other place for her opens her eyes to another reality. Another reality. And that reality evokes in her an emotion that brings her to an experience. The book is called Nettie's Trip South. It's a book I don't even know how I even found it the very first time. But I read it. It's a simple book. It's a kid's book. And I read it. And I've bought many, many copies of it for a lot of people. Because as simple as it is, it makes it very interesting. It tells us of a very interesting lesson. And you'll hear about it as I go through it quickly. Nettie is writing to her friend, Addie. Nettie lives in Albany, New York. She's traveling to the South in Civil War time, pre-Civil War time, to Richmond, Virginia, to see some relatives. And so this is a part of her diary, this book, of her journey from Albany to Richmond and what she saw. Dear Addie, you said, tell me about your trip south. Tell me everything. If we sat in our apple tree and I told you all, we would be there until the sun set. But these are the things I remember most. And though I'm only 10, I saw the slaves. I saw the South. Mother and father waved goodbye. The buggy creaked. I was in my new furs, excited to cry. Too excited to cry. And Sister Julia, grown up at 14, and Brother Lockwood shouted directions and orders, excited to be on his first newspaper story. Father said, go all of you. War may come soon, and this is your chance to see the South. And the other thing about this book is it has great illustrations as well. So when I read it to kids, I like to show them the pictures and so forth. I won't do a lot of that today. I admit I jumped. I admit I screamed a little when the train chuffed and puffed and hooted into the station. My first train ride ever. Lockwood sat back and pretended to be calm. But Julia and I bounced and twittered until our lace collars scratched our chins. Addie, I was so worried. I was almost sick. Julia told me that slaves were thought to be 3/5 of a person. It's in the Constitution. I'd never seen a slave and wondered, what are they missing? Was it an arm, a leg, a foot, something inside? I couldn't ask Lockwood. He has such a sharp tongue. And Julia was so busy being grown up. So I just kept my worry to myself. And all the way south on the train, across the Chesapeake Bay, I looked and looked at black people, but I could not see what they were missing. I stayed in my first hotel in Richmond. I asked a black maid, are you a slave? She nodded and said, Tabitha's my name. Don't have no other.
like a cat or a dog, Addie, with only one name. I looked and looked. But she had a nose, 2 eyes, and a mouth, 2 arms, and though I could not see her legs, I saw her feet under her skirts. I sighed then, and Tabitha opened the windows. A sweet cedar smell rushed in. She sniffed and said, "That's the sweet smell of the South, Missy." Next day, Brother took us on a buggy ride near the plantation. Trees were like old men with tattered gray coats, and the sun pressed down on our heads. Sister Julia was thirsty and asked the boy for water. His face was so black and round and fierce, it could have been fired from a cannon in war. I saw where he got the water. There was a shack run down with heaps of rags in the corner, I think for beds, and a grandfather with legs every which way lying on the rags. Everyone smiled and nodded except me. Some animals live better, Addie. The cedar didn't smell so sweet that night, and the smell got in my nose, and Brother walked and talked all that week. On Saturday, we went to town and stopped on a street by a green gate. A red flag outside said, "Negro auction today." I didn't want to go, Addie, but Brother said we had to see it for his story. Pulled us in and we sat down. There was a platform and a fat man in a tight white suit and a black woman on the platform. "Jump, Aunt, jump," the man shouted. Someone called out a price and she was gone. Gone, Addie, like a sack of flour pushed across a store counter. There was a man with a face like an oak in our yard, all twisted and ran, and he jumped and was sold. And 2 children our age clasped hands, but were bought by 2 different men. The man in the white hat had to tear them apart. I threw up, Addie, right there with the men and women about. They stepped aside and put their handkerchiefs to their nose, and I wanted to cry. I'm not what smells. But Brother took us home. Walked so fast I knew he was mad. He made me lie down to rest. He and Julia packed our bags, and I heard him say, "I've seen all I need to see." We left then, the sweet cedar smell still blowing in the wind, like the sun like a warm hand. And Tabitha waved from the door and told me, "Wear my furs." Addie, I couldn't wear my lace collar. I felt so raw and ill. We came home to the white and the ice. Julia wouldn't talk about what she saw, and Brother made up for that. When you come in June, we'll climb that apple tree to our perch, and I'll tell you all I saw. Addie, I can't get this thought, get this out of my thoughts. If we slipped into black skin like a tight coat, everything would change. No one would call us by our last names, for we wouldn't have them. Addie and Nettie we'd be, until we were worn out and died. And when someone called, we'd jump. We could not read in the apple tree with the sun coming through the leaves. No one would teach us to read, and no one would give us a book. And Addie, at any time, we could be sold by a fat man in a white hat in a tight white suit. And we'd have to go just like that. Dear Addie, write soon. I miss you. And I have bad dreams at night. Love, Nettie. Oop. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you guys hear me? Hi, my name is Cedric Cooper. I'm a principal here in the Lincoln Public Schools. I'm at Scope Middle School, and I am excited about this opportunity this afternoon to be here For one, I get away from the monotony in the school and the crazy lunches with middle schoolers. And also, I'd like to thank Mr. Ferguson for inviting me to this event. I'm new to Lincoln. I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska, so this is new to me, so I definitely would like to enjoy this experience, and I think that it's very special. I'm from the inner city of Omaha, Nebraska, so I know that Omaha is a little different than Lincoln from being here the last couple of years. Actually, it's a lot different for me. So when I think about my journey in education, I didn't know a whole lot outside of North Omaha until I was exposed to school. And then at that point, I knew that the only way for me to get out of the inner city or the ghetto was through my education. So as time went along, I finished school. As you all know, if I'm a principal, I had to finish school, right? But I met my wife when I graduated from college, and she's very strong about the African American culture. And so through some research and some reading, she exposed me to a book. It's called African People in World History. And so I know that in the month of February, we take that time to celebrate Black history, but I think that it's much deeper than just 1 month out the year. So this is an opportunity for me just to read a little bit from this book by John Henrik Clarke, who has done extensive research. He passed back in 1998. But there's some things about the African culture that really put Africans on the map. So I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit from this book, and then I'll wrap this up so that we can get someone else back up so that they can speak. After the Second World War, African consciousness was reflected in the literature and activities of the Civil Rights Movement. Black newspapers began to pay more attention to items about the developing crisis in African concurrent with their interest in personalities like Martin Luther King Jr. The coverage of news about African accelerated with the rise of independence movement on the continent of Africa and reached in culmination in March of 1957 when the Gold Coast gained its independence and took the ancient name of Ghana. Kwame Nkrumah, excuse the spelling or the pronunciation, Nkrumah, the first prime minister of Ghana, became a national hero to African Americans. Thus, the African freedom explosion was set in motion. This was an international movement affecting African people everywhere. The antecedents of this movement were the 19th century struggles against slavery and oppression in Africa, the Americas, and the Caribbean islands. At the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, someone found a name for this struggle: Pan-Africanism. This movement contributed to the African independence explosion, the Caribbean movement for independence and federation, and the civil rights movement for complete citizenship in the United States. Toward the close of the 1960s, many African Americans became disillusioned by white resistance to equal rights for African Americans. They began to shift their attention away from protest-oriented approaches to militant approaches and racial equality in the United States. The era of Black Revolution emerged as numerous groups advocating militarism, separatism, and cultural nationalism. Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale organized Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, which called for full employment, decent housing, Black control of the Black community, and an end to every form of repression and police brutality. Some African Americans felt that whites would never concede to racial equality and that the creation of an independent Black state was the solution to resolving racial inequity. In 1967, the Black Power Conference in Newark, New Jersey, called for dividing the United States into two independent nations, one for whites and the other for Blacks. Other African Americans focused on Africa as their home and adopted African names and dressed to express their connection with the motherland. As Black nationalists, they demanded control of the institutions in the Black community, particularly in the schools, colleges, and universities. Black nationalists insisted on introducing Black students to Black history, Black literature, and other subjects in Black studies. The late 60s and the early 70s is also identified as the era of Black political revolution. The number of Black representatives in state legislators and Congress grew 2- and 3-fold respectively. In 1966, there was no Black mayor in any American city. However, by 1973, African Americans served as mayors in several large cities nationwide, as well as in several southern towns. Some African Americans were not certain that they could achieve their goals throughout the established political organizations or that the established political parties would take them seriously. These sentiments led to the calling of the First National Black Political Convention, which met in Gary, Indiana in March of 1972. Despite major opposition among delegates on policy issues, a committee of leaders released the National Black Political Agenda in May of 1972. This agenda contained a Poor People's Platform, model pledges for political candidates seeking convention support, a bill for voter registration, and a bill for community self-determination. In the August 1980 meeting, convention delegates passed a resolution to establish a national independent black political party within 100 days. The National Black Independent Political Party was founded in Philadelphia in November of 1980, and its first party congress convened in August of 1981. By the middle 70s, the growth in black political power and its reward were considerable, but not great enough. Although African Americans won elective offices and received government appointments they could only aspire to hold only 2 decades earlier, the number of blacks holding electives and appointed offices was infinitesimal compared with whites. The economic disadvantage of African Americans persisted, so many black families were unemployed and on welfare during the decade of the 70s that University of Chicago sociologist William Julius Wilson feared that the legacy of discrimination and oppression coupled with the technology revolution had created a permanent class of black unskilled workers. The black middle class was undoubtedly growing in size, influence, but a huge economic gap existed between them and the white middle class. African Americans who occupied the middle class was typically earned less and had less opportunities for job advancement than their white counterparts. African Americans sought economic power and became convinced that the ballot would help them secure it. Jesse Jackson announced candidacy for president in October of 1983. The American public had witnessed an African American making a formal bid for the presidency within a major political party only once before, Shirley Chisholm in 1972. Jackson clearly stated that one of his main goals was to encourage the disenfranchised to register and vote. People of all races, creeds rallied within the Rainbow Coalition for a common purpose: to place men and women in the public service whose primary purpose was to serve the best interests of their constituents. Jackson's candidacies were undoubtedly a great stimulus to black registration and voting to the growth in black office holders. More African Americans voted in the presidential elections in 1984 and 1988 than ever before. African Americans viewed their fate as inextricably linked to the fate of Africans throughout the world. In 1984, African Americans took the lead in pressuring the United States government to oppose apartheid in South Africa. African National Congress leaders Nelson Mandela directed the attention of African Americans to Africa in a way that had not been done since the emergence of Kwame in Ghana in 1957. The political activities of Nelson Mandela's wife, Winnie Mandela, were equally influential. African Americans regarded her as the Pan-African nationalist who more directly linked the struggle against political and economic oppression in South Africa with the struggle for freedom of African people everywhere in the world. Okay, this is long, so I'll go ahead and I'll end that there. But this book really resonates with me as an African American, definitely here in the Lincoln Public Schools, being the only African American principal. You know, I have to stand for a lot. And when you say like you're the only one that's in a position to be a principal in the public schools, it feels like there's a lot of burden on my shoulders to make sure that I do right for everybody. So there is one quote that I do want to leave you guys with. And this comes from Carter G. Woodson. And it says, "When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him to stand here or go yonder. He will find his proper place, will stay in it, and stay in it. You do not need to send him to the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, he will cut one for his special benefit. His education makes it necessary." So for me, I am glad to be able to have a voice, and I'm really excited that I had an opportunity to get an education. So I always think of this quote and know that I have to stand up and do what's right by all people. So I have to thank you, Pete, for allowing me to have a voice today.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is DeJuan Baker. I serve as the Diversity and Inclusion Director in the Department of Athletics here at UNL for Nebraska Athletics. Born and raised in St. Louis, just like John, similarly. And the piece I picked today, I picked it because of the title, and the title is Young, Gifted, and Black. Surprisingly, I don't believe that the passage has much to do with it. When I first read it, I reflected back on specifically this idea of kind of like the new Negro movement and the Harlem Renaissance, because it reads as if somebody is saying, "Oh, I'm here. This is who I am. This is what I'm doing. This is how I'm stating myself." And I think about that a lot in the work that I do, and I think about that a lot in regards to how I think about myself and the professionals that I work with every day, whether they are of my complexion or not. I tend to think of myself as young, gifted, and black, and I know nothing but young, gifted, and black individuals as well. So it is written by Ebony Stewart, who is an author, a national poet. Again, wrote it in 2016, but it reads such as 1920, in my opinion. And it reads, "My name is not convenient. It is the child forgotten, stolen from historical value. My name is the guilt you try to shame me with, a burden to the grief that haunts you. Before my name could be full and brave, it was lynched and barbecue skeptical. My name has been raped, branded, and whipped. My name is the chocolate milk breast your babies cling from, and from a lost protagonist of ancient history. Or did you forget how the story goes? My name is how easy it is to misplace the truth, to strip me of all this mighty so I can live a life under servitude. My name is a reminder of black children who have been murdered in the South, North, East, and the West. Because my name is a threat. My name is the absence in your amen. Or did you forget how the story goes? My name ain't never got a pass. Can't. Got too much oil, too slick. Too much scratch, too much punch, and too much fight. My name is real confrontational. Ain't interested in being comfortable. My name bite too hard. It must have been caged. It must have been animalistic once. My name only necessary after it benefits you, and you say my name ain't right. Well, my mama say everything that has a beginning began with me. Say I'm a blistering queen or king. Say my name is a filter, and all the light gotta pass through me. My name is a giant. Its rise is healing, and it's learning how to remember itself. My name is the Congo, the beating sound you dance to. My name is the utterance struggle, and it meets pride, grace, and it meets visible. Yeah, you see me reinventing myself, reclaiming my power. My name be the hero that freed us. It's reborn Negro and new growth. My name done trying to figure it out, and done trying to figure out why you don't love me. My name is a wealthy affirmation. My name is what blackness done, what it's been through, and what it can be. My name say, I can't be impossible, because my name is existence. That's by Ebony Stewart. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sadio Fenner. I'm one of the members of the UNL cross country and track and field team. I'm originally from Colorado Springs, Colorado. Today I'd like to read a poem by Nashon. It's called refuse to fail. And for me, I think like it spoke to me part because like it has like some metaphors that have to do with running, because that's essentially like what got me here. But at the same time, like I think it's really empowering to the youth, because I feel like growing up there weren't like a whole lot of things that were really explained to me. It was just kind of like, you know, you get thrown into it and you just got to figure it out. So I think this kind of gives like an explanation of like what you're going to go through in life, and this goes for anybody of any color. Though the road to success is as the road to salvation, a slim and narrow road paved with trials and tribulations, difficult these obstacles are, yet not impossible to overcome. My keys to success, inner strength, and application of wisdom. I refuse to fail, I refuse to fail, I will prevail and conquer all. See, I wasn't always in this peaceful space. It took great efforts to get where I am at in this race. The race of life where I am competing against myself to gain peace, prosperity, good health, and increase my wealth. I refuse to fail, I refuse to fail, I will prevail, I can conquer all. Negative thinking has no place with me and mine. It must be positive or else it's a waste of time. Time wasted serves me not. It doesn't equate with my soul. I can become a better man if I continue pushing to my goal. I refuse to fail, I refuse to fail, I will prevail, I can conquer all. Slowing down will not get me to where I need to be. There is no way that I can stop my activities. I want to see the fruits of my labors, the work of my own hands. In less than 7 years, reach financial independence to be my own man. I refuse to fail, I refuse to fail, I will prevail, I can conquer all. I needn't work for someone else, increase their worth and glory. That's not what I want for myself. That's not how to end my story. A strong family, contentment of heart, peace of mind, for these I toll. Work to see my hands fruition, provided for my family's future, to see these remain loyal. I've set my head straight, my path I mustn't alter. A course I've set for myself, I will not falter. My mindset on this position can be answered in my affirmation. I refuse to fail, I refuse to fail, I will prevail, I can conquer all. Thank you.
Good. All right, thank you. How you guys doing? My name is Michael Hunter. I am the District Transition Specialist for Lincoln Public Schools. Kind of like a lot of individuals I spoke today, like Captain Boyd, we all have our stories that make us who we are today. And like Brother Harris, I am a native of Kansas City, Missouri. I grew up in the most gang-infested part of Missouri that it could possibly be. And so the poem I picked kind of piggybacks on what everybody have read today itself, and it's called Back to Being Human by Miss Moam, and it reads as such. Let's get back to being human. We have lost it some way. We devolved in war and warriors. Let's regain the human track. Let's get back to being human. Is who we're meant to be. It's true that we are complex, but we can live in harmony. Let's get back to being human. What does that mean to you? Is it wrapped up in your words or your thoughts and all the things you do? Let's get back to being human. I really feel we should. As what it means to be human, it cruises through our blood. That poem speaks a lot to me just due to the fact of where I come from and how I made it out. And it kind of piggybacks on everything that someone said here today. We looking at color, we looking at this, we looking at that. But if we really just take a page out of this, words from this poem, we're all one. We're one human being. And so if we just truly just get back to being human, I believe everything else will work itself out. So that's why I chose this poem today, and I greatly thank Pete for doing what he's doing, and I greatly appreciate being here. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, each of you, so much for your stories. And when we gather like this, we are writing the story of a community that values its story, values its literature, values its education. One of the things that I hope each person will do before you leave the library today is dig into your purse or wallet, pull out your library card. Notice that there are many books on display that I'm sure you want to take home with you. If you don't have a library card yet, we're happy to set you up. So at any rate, don't leave the library empty-handed. Take a few more stories with you, please. I want to, in conclusion, say again, thank you to Pete, thank you to Brenda, thank you for all of you who shared those great selections and your own stories. I invite you to conclude our event with a warm round of applause for all of our tellers and readers today. And there's more.
There is more for John Harris.
Oh. John Harris has left us some bracelets to take and share and wear. Celebrate Black History. Be a history maker. Thank you, John. And there's also African American History Bingo. So other things, again, to take with you to make this time last longer and connect to your home and heart. Pete, any other announcements that need to be made?
If you're still here from a reading, I know we had to have some leave to get back to their daily duties, so we could have you up front real quick so we can just get a group picture.
Okay.
And thank you, City TV5 and Channel 8. I'm sorry. What? Dish TV, sorry. No, thank you, Channel 8.
Okay, thanks to everyone.